The Federalist Papers. I propose, in a series of papers, to examine the utility of union to your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present confederation, the necessity of an energetic government, and the conformity of the proposed plan to the true principles of republican government. When the people reflect upon the question before them, nothing is more evident than that their safety and happiness require them to remain one united people, under one federal government, rather than divide into separate confederacies exposed to foreign intrigue. The safety of the people against foreign force and influence will be best secured by union, for a single national government can more effectively prevent just causes of war, and more readily accommodate differences than multiple separate states or confederacies. One national government will best provide for the common defense and preserve peace with foreign nations, since it can command greater resources, maintain a consistent policy, and avoid the jealousies and quarrels that arise among separate states. If the union is dissolved, the separate states or confederacies will soon become jealous rivals, invite foreign alliances against one another, and fall prey to the very dangers of division that history has shown destroy free governments. The history of mankind proves that neighbouring nations or states, left to themselves without a firm union, will inevitably become rivals and enemies, leading to frequent wars that destroy liberty and prosperity. Disunion would expose the states to territorial disputes, commercial rivalries, public debt controversies, and other causes of conflict that could only be settled by the sword if no common government exists to adjudicate them. If the states become separate and hostile, they will be forced to maintain standing armies for mutual defense, which will gradually undermine their liberties and subject them to the very military despotism they now fear from a stronger union. A firm union will prove the best barrier against domestic faction and insurrection, for a well-constructed Confederate republic can control the violence of faction while preserving the advantages of republican government. Among the advantages of a well-constructed union, none deserves more attention than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction by extending the sphere of government so that no single faction can dominate the whole. The union will enable America to command respect abroad, develop a respectable navy, and secure commercial advantages that separate states could never achieve alone against European powers. The union will provide the most effective means of raising revenue through commerce and taxation, avoiding the ruinous competition and smuggling that would plague separate states. A single union government will prove far more economical than 13 separate state governments or several confederacies, reducing the burden of supporting multiple expensive establishments. The proposed constitution is perfectly compatible with the extent of our country, for a federal republic can govern a large territory while preserving the liberties of the people far better than any pure democracy ever could. The present confederation is clearly insufficient to preserve the union, as experience has shown that a government without power to enforce its resolutions directly upon individuals must inevitably fail. The weakness of the confederation will lead either to its dissolution or to the necessity of employing military force against states, both of which outcomes threaten the peace and liberty of the people. The confederation lacks the energy to execute its laws, and its dependence upon the states for enforcement renders it incapable of maintaining order or suppressing internal disorders. The history of ancient confederacies demonstrates the fatal defects of such systems and the necessity of a stronger government that can act with energy and uniformity. The experience of modern European confederacies confirms that loose alliances inevitably lead to weakness, discord, and eventual dissolution, unless replaced by a more perfect union. The Confederacy of the United Netherlands, like all others, proves that a government which operates only upon states in their collective capacity is inherently weak and impracticable. The present confederation is deficient in the great and essential articles of a federal government, particularly the power to raise money, and the power to enforce laws directly upon individuals. The want of a judiciary power and the principle of legislation for states in their collective capacities are fundamental defects that render the Confederation utterly unfit for the government of a great nation. The principal purposes to be answered by the Union require a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed. For energy in the executive is essential to the protection of the community. The powers necessary to the common defence ought to exist without limitation, because it is impossible to foresee or define the extent and variety of national exigencies. The idea of restraining the legislative authority in the means of providing for the national defence is one of those refinements which owe their origin to a zeal for liberty more ardent than enlightened. The necessity of a standing army in time of peace is a question that must be left to the discretion of the legislature, for no government can be safe without the power to provide for its own defence. The federal government must have the power to make laws that operate directly upon individuals, for only then can it execute its authority with energy and uniformity. The use of force by the national government against a state would be a last resort, but the possibility of such force is essential to the existence of the Union. The regulation of the militia properly belongs to the federal government, for a well-regulated militia is the natural defence of a free country and the best security against standing armies. The power of taxation is the most necessary of all the powers of government, and the federal government must possess it without limitation if it is to fulfill its duties. The power of taxation must be unlimited in the national legislature, for the necessities of the Union cannot be foreseen or limited, and the government must have the means to provide for them. The power of taxation is concurrent between the federal and state governments, and this arrangement is both necessary and consistent with the principles of the Constitution. The necessary and proper clause is only declaratory of the authority that would have been implied by the Constitution even without it, and is essential to the proper execution of the federal powers. The proposed Constitution is far less dangerous to the liberties of the people than the existing Confederation, for it provides for a division of powers that secures both national and state authority. The representation in the House of Representatives will be sufficiently numerous to secure the interests of all classes of citizens, and the power of taxation will be exercised with wisdom and justice. The internal police of the states will remain with the state governments, and the federal power of taxation will not interfere with the proper administration of local affairs. The difficulties encountered by the Convention in framing a proper form of government were necessarily great, and the result must be judged by the standard of practical necessity rather than theoretical perfection. The present Confederation is so radically defective that the Convention was compelled to propose an entirely new system, and the people ought to ratify it as the best that could be obtained under the circumstances. The proposed Constitution is strictly republican in form, deriving all its powers directly or indirectly from the great body of the people, and depending on them for its continuance. The Convention was fully authorized by the states to propose a new constitution, and the plan they have offered is within the scope of that authority and necessary for the preservation of the Union. The powers conferred by the Constitution upon the federal government are necessary to the common defence, the preservation of public peace, and the regulation of commerce, and they are no greater than the exigencies of the Union require. The additional powers granted to the federal government, particularly those relating to the regulation of intercourse with foreign nations and among the states, are essential to the prosperity and security of the Union. The miscellaneous powers granted by the Constitution, including the power to admit new states and to guarantee republican government to each state, are necessary to complete the great design of the Union. The restrictions laid upon the authority of the states and necessary to prevent those mischiefs which have heretofore proved fatal to every confederacy, and to secure the uniformity and stability of the national government. The powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined, while those which remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. So the balance is clearly in favour of the states. The federal and state governments are in fact different agents and trustees of the people, and the people will always be the masters of both. So there is no danger that the federal government will ever overpower the states. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, is the very definition of tyranny, and the proposed constitution has carefully separated and distributed these powers among the different departments. The mere demarcation of the powers of the several departments is not a sufficient guard against encroachments, and therefore some constitutional controls must be provided to keep each department within its proper limits. Appeals to the people by constitutional conventions are proper only in cases of great and extraordinary occasions, and the frequent recurrence of such appeals would be highly improper and dangerous. Periodical appeals to the people for the decision of constitutional questions would be inconvenient, would disturb the public tranquillity, and would render the constitution too mutable. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. And the great security against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. The House of Representatives will be composed of members chosen by the people, for short terms, and in such numbers as to secure a due sympathy with the feelings and interests of the people. The term of service for members of the House of Representatives is wisely fixed at 2 years, a period long enough to allow them to acquire knowledge of the public business, and short enough to keep them dependent on the people. The rule which requires the apportionment of representatives and direct taxes according to the number of free inhabitants and 3/5 of the slaves is the only practicable rule that could have been adopted. The number of representatives fixed by the Constitution is sufficient to secure the benefits of free consultation and discussion, and to guard against the confusion and intemperance of a multitude. The total number of the House of Representatives is as large as can be safely entrusted with the management of the public interests, and experience will soon demonstrate its sufficiency. The House of Representatives will be composed of the most distinguished and virtuous citizens, chosen by the people themselves, and will have no interest in oppressing the people. The Constitution wisely provides for the future augmentation of the number of representatives as the population increases, thereby securing a due proportion between the representatives and the people. The power of regulating the time, place, and manner of electing members of Congress is properly vested in the legislature itself, subject to the control of the national legislature. The national legislature will have no temptation to abuse the power of regulating elections, for the interests of the Union and of the states will always be the same in this respect. The power of regulating elections is a necessary and proper power that cannot be safely lodged anywhere but in the national legislature. The Senate is so constituted as to possess great firmness and stability, and to be a salutary check upon the more popular branch of the legislature. The Senate is a necessary body that will supply the want of stability and wisdom in the popular branch, and will be a most valuable institution in the government. The powers of the Senate, particularly in the making of treaties, are wisely vested in that body, which is so constituted as to combine the advantages of wisdom, stability, and responsibility. The Senate is the proper tribunal to try impeachments, for its members are chosen with a view to their wisdom and integrity, and the nature of the proceeding requires the qualities of a court of justice. The objections to the Senate sitting as a court of impeachment are without foundation, and the arrangement is the most safe and convenient that could have been devised. The executive department is so constituted as to unite energy and responsibility, and the objections raised against it are founded on misrepresentations and unfounded alarms. The mode of electing the president, by electors chosen by the people in the several states, is the most eligible that could have been devised, combining the advantages of popular choice with the security of an intermediate body. The executive power, as vested in the president, is far less dangerous than the power of the King of Great Britain, and is, in reality, a republican and responsible magistracy. Energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government, and a single executive is far preferable to a plural executive in every respect. The duration of the executive in office ought to be such as will give him the necessary firmness and independence, and 4 years is a period long enough for this purpose. The executive ought to be re-eligible, for the exclusion of re-election would deprive the community of the advantage of the experience and wisdom of a good magistrate. The qualified negative of the President upon the acts of the two houses of the legislature is a salutary check upon hasty or improper legislation, and will preserve the just balance of the government. The command of the military and naval forces, together with the power to pardon, is most safely and properly vested in the President as the supreme executive magistrate. The power of making treaties is properly shared between the President and the Senate, for it partakes of the nature both of an executive and of a legislative act. The President's power to nominate officers, subject to the advice and consent of the Senate, will secure the appointment of men best qualified for public trust. The remaining powers of the President, when taken together with those already examined, will constitute an executive department fully competent to the great objects of government. The judiciary is the least dangerous branch to the political rights of the Constitution, for it has no influence over the sword or the purse, and its province is merely to declare the law. The provision for the permanent support and the tenure during good behaviour of the judges is essential to the independence and impartiality of the judiciary. The jurisdiction of the federal courts is confined to cases which, from their nature, belong to the national government, and which cannot safely be left to the decision of the state courts. The Supreme Court, together with the inferior courts established by Congress, will form a complete and effective system for the administration of national justice. The judicial power of the Union will extend to the same cases to which it extends at present under the Confederation, and the state courts will retain their ordinary jurisdiction. The want of a constitutional provision for trial by jury in civil cases is not an objection to the Constitution, for the subject is of such a nature that it could not be regulated by any general rule. The omission of a Bill of Rights is not an objection to the Constitution, for the Constitution itself is in every rational sense a Bill of Rights, and the proposed amendments are unnecessary. The proposed Constitution, though not perfect, is the best that could have been obtained under the circumstances, and it is far preferable to the present Confederation. I therefore earnestly recommend its adoption.